Please welcome Senior Vice President of Partnerships at The Atlantic, Molly Cox.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Progress Summit, Building a Foundation for the Future. This afternoon, we will explore how the rapid pace of progress is shaping the next generation, the challenges and opportunities that these advances entail, and how we build the strongest foundation for the future. I want to thank our underwriter, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, for their support of The Atlantic's journalism. Please silence your cell phones. You know the drill. Keep them handy and use the hashtag TAF25. Now let's get started.
For a conversation on raising resilience in a digital world, please welcome Becky Kennedy, clinical psychologist and founder and CEO of Good Inside, with Julie Beck, staff writer at The Atlantic.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Dr. Becky, it's so exciting to be here with you.
Me too.
I'm so excited to have you. So we will get into talking about technology in just a minute, but first I wanted for those in the audience who may not be as familiar with your approach to just kind of get like an overview of your philosophy toward parenting. So with your book and your app and podcast, like the watchword is good inside, right? So this idea that regardless of behavior, all kids are good inside, and we start with that place with parenting. Can you explain a little bit how that manifests in kind of the nitty-gritty day-to-day of parenting?
Yeah, so I think that's right. Everything that drives my approach with parents and kids is based on this idea that we are all born good inside. And that can sometimes make us think, okay, does that just mean we're going to permit everything a kid does? But to me, the most important thing when you're looking at any human's behavior is actually understanding this gap. That often we see bad behavior. That's something we see. It's something someone does. But that has a gap with who someone is. Identity versus behavior. And most of child rearing to this point has been based on a foundation where there's no gap. I see my kid hit a sibling, and I just say, go to your room. Why would you do that? My kid lies to my face, and I think, oh, my kid's such a sociopath. They have no empathy. What's wrong with them, right? And so we see behavior on the surface, and we assume we know everything about that person. This obviously applies to adult relationships too. If you want to ever be effective in any relationship, and certainly we want to be effective with our kids, we have to separate those two. Because as soon as there's a gap between identity and behavior, we can wonder, why would my good kid hit? Why would my good kid lie to my face? Well, why do I lie to someone? And when there's a gap between identity and behavior, we can start to see a kid's bad behavior not as a sign of who they are, but as a sign of the skills they need to build. And then that completely changes our role.
And so the ultimate goal of parenting, as you see it, is less about getting a certain behavior to start or stop, and more about just understanding and connecting. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no trade-off here. And in other areas, we actually understand this more easily. So if you think about a kid who can't make a layup in basketball, you want your kid to make a layup. But no good coach would say, if you can't make a layup by tomorrow, go to your room and come back when you can make a layup. I won't permit this bad basketball behavior. All of us would say, it doesn't make any sense. Of course I want my kid to make a layup. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to focus on the underlying skills, and I'm going to have to stay connected to my kid. No kid is going to learn from a coach who's just yelling at them. They have to believe my coach believes in me, and they like me, and they hold me to a high standard, all of it. So of course I want my kid to stop hitting. Yes, but we're not going to get there by just focusing on the behavior. The behavior is a sign my kid doesn't know how to manage anger, or my kid doesn't know how to deal with jealousy. So by focusing on the anger or the jealousy, I can say, well, what would my kid have to do the next time they're mad at their sibling to make a better choice? And so there's really no trade-off here. By focusing on staying connected, being curious, and building skills, that's actually how we improve behavior.
I think that's actually a good segue to talk about technology, because given that connection is front of mind, right? It seems like, the strongest argument in favor of, technology for kids, giving your kid a phone, is that their friends are in the phone. You know, there's connection in the phone, that's where their friends are, those interactions. They don't want to be missing out. And at the same time, we know that there are things about screens that can lead to isolation and disconnection. So how do you kind of think about the decisions around giving kids screens in terms of those trade-offs when it comes to connection?
Yeah, without a doubt, screens, phones, they can offer, you know, kind of connection or things that are positive to kids. And I tend not to be too rigid, you know, about my approach. I'm a pragmatist. I have 3 kids of my own. I know what it's like to try to, you know, make good decisions here. But giving a kid a phone at a young age and expecting them to make good decisions would be like putting a 2-year-old in a candy store and saying, make good decisions. I mean, it would be putting me in a candy store and saying to make good decisions. Like, these are very impossible things to do, because a 2-year-old in a candy store being told have 1 piece of candy a day and that's it, they don't have the skills to manage their urges. And so we are actually setting them up to make bad decisions. And then I'm setting myself up as a parent to now punish my kid out of frustration. It's a horrible setup for everyone. Giving a kid access to a device at a young age, their prefrontal cortex is not developed. They can't make long-term decisions. They are going to be faced with things they should never see. That's just the nature of the internet. And they're going to be curious. We want our kids to be curious. But never before until now has, especially in adolescence, the natural urge to be curious been met with kind of unparalleled access to things that are a completely horrible match for curiosity. And so we cannot tell our kids, just make good decisions. We actually have to do something, maybe we'll talk about this, which I think is very rare these days in parenting, and one of the things I like to teach about most, called setting boundaries and letting our kids be upset with us.
Well, as I told you backstage, I'm not a parent right now, but I have often thought that if I ever had kids, I would want to like pull an M. Night Shyamalan's like The Village and pretend that the internet didn't exist until they were like 12. Do you think that's a good idea?
I would, more than good or bad idea, I would just like love to know how you're going to accomplish that.
Yeah.
I'm a pragmatist, so I don't know how you're going to do that.
If you haven't seen this movie, it's about like a, you know, seemingly 19th century village that's like being haunted, and then the village elders are like sort of doing the haunting to keep people from finding out that they actually live in the modern day. Sorry to spoil it. It has been out for like 20 years, so I feel like it's fine.
But the thing that you're saying that I think you can really draw inspiration from is, I can say in my family, and I think a lot of the families we talk to at Good Inside, thinking about the things you really loved in your childhood, and kind of going analog, I think is such an antidote to this technological world we live in. So carving out time where no one's on your phone and you actually find out the board games your kids are willing to play with you. And actually, the first couple times, you're gonna have to hear whines. I don't wanna do this, can I just have my iPad? And you just can't take the bait. Let your kid whine, don't even get so mad at them. We all whine too if we are presented with something that's new and unfamiliar. But board games, or having a family dinner and making that the priority on one weeknight, those things matter so much for a kid's mental health. And so I do think we can draw some inspiration from that.
Maybe just a little.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because one sort of genre of suggestion that I've seen going around is kind of like this like retro tech kind of approach. Like, we ran an article in the Atlantic actually about like a pod of parents who all made a pact to get their kids landlines. Or people will say like, let's just have like a single desktop in the family room and like you can use it with the parents watching. So what do you think of that sort of like retro approach to all of this?
I mean, again, I think there's so many different manifestations, so many different things we can do, but you know, and I know the article and you know what you're referencing, but I think this is a group of parents who are trying to figure out, how do we live our values? Like, how do we actually set up our kids for success? And then every family is going to do that differently. But I think being able to say to yourself as a parent, I don't have to do what everyone else is doing. And this part is key, talking to other parents in your community early. I have, my oldest is in 8th grade. There were a group of us who were talking about, what age are we going to give our kids phones? By the way, do you let your kids use an iPad on the weekend? At what hour? Can we just start talking about this when our kids are really young, these themes, kindergarten, 1st grade, not with moral superiority, like there's one way to do it, but can we just have open communication? So when my kid says, I'm the only one who can't do screens at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, I actually know that's not true, because most parents actually want to make similar decisions, But the pain of thinking that your kid is the only one who is too much, and that is hard. And as soon as you can take that away through community, together you can make better decisions.
You can do a little bit of fact checking on some of those.
And just say, let's be the group that holds out. Let's say we're going to do this together. And then my kid does have other friends who, let's say, you know, isn't on Instagram or whatever the decision might be.
Yeah, the retro thing is kind of interesting to me because on one hand I'm like, well, it seems like a good compromise, like it seems like halfway, right? But how much like do we need, you know, is there a way that it does kind of feel like The Village where we need to prepare kids to like live in a world with the, you know, TikTok and ChatGPT and the tech that actually defines the age that they live in?
Yeah, I hear this from parents all the time because I do think a lot about how important it is to, first of all, pre-technology, and I'm going to start with this because I think it's the part that's left out of the conversation about tech and kids, and I actually think it's the most important part of the conversation. If you're trying to set guidelines with your kid around their phone when you give them a phone, and basically that's the first time you've ever held a boundary with your kid ever, the reason your kid is going to freak out has nothing to do with the phone. The reason your kid is freaking out is because they're kind of saying, you have never held a boundary in my life. You've never said no to a cupcake. You've never said no to the thing I want in a store. Every time I get upset, you kind of seem scared of me being upset, so you fix the situation. And now I'm 13 or 16. I'm not reacting to the phone. I'm reacting to the fact that I don't even recognize this parent. It has never been more important to set boundaries with kids and help kids learn that your job is not to make them happy. Because the cost of not doing that when your kid is then in the tech world is so high. It's not just the tech that's kind of leading to our children's staggering rates of mental health struggles. It's the fact that we as parents are no longer setting boundaries and keeping our kids safe, which doesn't mean, by the way, one extreme, which a lot of us grew up with, you're not getting a phone, whatever. No, that's just pushing your kid away. But saying to your kid, my job is to make decisions I believe are good for you long term, and I love you so much that I'm willing to do that even in moments that I know you're going to be upset with me because I know our relationship can get through that. The earlier your kid is when you establish that pattern, the easier all of the stuff around tech will be.
Well, I know you've written that you feel like the word boundaries is like missing from the sort of conversation with kids in tech, and I'm curious, like, how are we missing that? How are we ignoring that? And like, what is it about tech that makes those boundaries like so anxiety-inducing for parents?
So let's just define it first, because I think most of us, even in adulthood, have a definition of a boundary that is either unclear or just isn't right. So here's how I define a boundary, and I like the definition because it's very usable in a practical way. Boundaries are what you tell your kid you will do, and they require your kid to do nothing. So many times I hear from parents in tech, I told my kid not to be on their phone, and they're on their phone. I told my kid not to be in their iPad, and they're on their iPad. They're not respecting my boundaries. And I say this, or they say like, they don't listen, you know? And I say this with love. I say, your kid doesn't have a listening problem, you have a boundary problem. Because if you're leaving the iPad out, that's not a boundary. You might make a request, don't take the iPad when it's not iPad time. But if you want to set a boundary, you'd actually put the iPad out of reach and out of sight until the moment your kid has iPad time, because not many of us can be in the room with a device and not take it. Our kids definitely can't do that, right? And so we set ourselves up for these awful cycles of frustration because we're actually not setting a boundary. So if you say to yourself, wait, am I telling my kid something I will do? And does this require my kid to do nothing? You have to have 2 check marks in order to qualify for a boundary, which actually gives parents their power back. This is not about blaming parents. Think about it. I'm gonna put the success of my boundary on my 4-year-old or my 14-year-old? Like, I don't think so. I'm not gonna give my power away. This is on me. I think the other thing that makes it really hard with tech is that tech is designed to make us feel like we've never done enough. That's what it's designed to do. Something I found really helpful to explain to my kid, no matter how much you're watching a show, or definitely when you're on an iPad or a phone, no matter how much time you have, it's kind of like a cup with a hole. No matter how much I pour in, when you're done, the cup is gonna feel empty. And it's so compelling to think, just pour in more. But The issue actually is that it's just a cup with an empty hole. And so you're not wrong for feeling like it's never enough. That's actually how everyone feels. And so the next time you say, oh, 5 minutes more, I'm gonna kind of remind you of that. The iPad's gonna shut down because we have this timer. You're gonna be upset, and I totally get that. And sweetie, it will be over, and we're gonna get used to it over time.
So if the boundary is like, you know, don't be on your iPad unless it's iPad time, right? Okay. We said that's not gonna work. So how would you rephrase that to be an effective boundary?
So I'd say
instead?
I think it's so empowering connecting to say to a kid, you know how we've been getting into all these arguments about your iPad, you've been on it, when I say no, I feel like I haven't been so fair to you. The truth is, I'm not great about seeing my phone in a room and not getting it. It's so hard, and that's not your fault. So we're gonna actually do something different. From now on, every day, I'm going to give you your iPad when it's iPad time. I changed parental controls, or I got an app that when it's over, it shuts down, so that's just the time there is. And then any other time but that time, I'm going to put the iPad out of sight and out of reach. And see, when you say it like that, you can say the same intervention from a very different intention. This is absurd, you can't control yourself, I'm putting the iPad away. That is the same intervention on the surface. Kids feel our intention, not our intervention. They just feel, my parent thinks I'm a bad kid, I guess I am a bad kid, and when we tell our kids they're a bad kid, we build their identity as a bad kid. Why should we be surprised that they do more behaviors along the lines of that identity? The first intervention, I always say, for boundaries aren't something you do to a kid, boundaries are something you do for your kid, because you love your kid and you're looking out for their long-term interest.
I want to dig in a little more to like what may happen in that moment, right? So in my experience, you know, whether we're talking about a young kid who wants more iPad time or an older kid who wants a phone, like kids are little lawyers. Like they're going to negotiate. They're going to keep asking over and over, same thing. They're going to, you know, find their arguments. As they get older, the arguments get more convincing. So when you're thinking about boundaries around tech for your kids, like, do you negotiate? Do you meet them at the arbitration table?
So it's a great question, and I think I'd probably shift the question a little bit because I don't really think we're talking about negotiation first. I think one of the things we have to figure out as parents in any area with our kids is, what are my non-negotiables, right? And that shouldn't be a million things. Like for me, I don't really care what my kids wear to school. I'm just not gonna fight that battle. I'm gonna save it for the thing I care about, right? Screens, technology is one area that I think I have to embody my appropriate authority. So I often think about this like a pilot, right? And to me, Good Inside is about sturdy parenting, which really is this balance of boundaries and validation and connection all at once. And it is along the lines of what we want from a pilot. So picture you're in New York, you're flying to LA, and you really have to get to LA. It's like the equivalent of this festival, you have a ticket for it, it's a wedding, it's a meeting, you like have to get there, and you're 2 hours in, you're somewhere over the middle of the country, and your pilot says, I have bad news, we have to make an emergency landing. And then you start, what? Like, there's no way this is a big deal. I have to get to this festival, right? I don't think the pilot's saying, do I negotiate? Do I negotiate? Like, I don't really want them to be upset. I feel like they're gonna give me a bad rating on Yelp. Like, I don't know, maybe, you know, actually, everyone seems upset. Forget it. We'll keep flying. Can you imagine how you'd feel on that flight? And it's so important because you can hold two things as true. I am whining and protesting, and I want my pilot to make the decision that maximizes my safety. Please don't take my whining and protest into the cockpit and use that to make your decision. That would terrify you. And when you think about it that way, the questions we ask when our kids protest totally change. It's not really, do I negotiate? It's, if I have a non-negotiable that I really believe internally is good for my kids' safety and growth, I can certainly validate my kids' feelings. I recommend you do, just like a pilot. It would actually be helpful to say, I know, you didn't expect this, you're gonna miss the festival. That's a bummer. But then you want the pilot to say, I'm getting off the loudspeaker because I'm gonna make this emergency landing and keep us safe. That's like saying to your kid, I get it, this is a change. It's gonna be hard to adjust to this. No wonder you're upset. And my #1 job is to keep you safe. I take that job very seriously, and we're gonna figure this out. I'm not getting you a phone, I get it. It's really annoying, and there's things we can figure out to stay connected to your friends, and here are the other friends who also don't have it, and I get you're annoyed. Honestly, I'd be annoyed if I were in your place too. We're gonna figure this out together.
So you are being empathetic, but ultimately you're holding the boundary you came in with, and it's just kind of not up for discussion, sorry.
Unless, again, like too often as parents, we use our kids' protest as a reason to change our internal decisions. That is a very unsturdy thing to do in any area of leadership.
So
right?
you need to is the idea then that like they're gonna negotiate, they're gonna be upset, they're gonna have their reasons, they're gonna, and what actually you need to do is figure out how to manage your own feelings about it.
Well, now we're on to something, because I think at Good Inside people always say, are we even talking about our kids? I feel like I'm just talking about managing my emotions.
Is the inside my inside? Was it my inside all along?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are moments, tech, non-tech, as a parent, where you realize, I've changed my opinion. You know as a parent whether you've changed your opinion because something shifted, you have new information, or because you're scared of your kids' protest. Changing your mind from the first place is actually, again, a great thing to do as a leader. From the second place, that's where things kind of go off the rails.
So if I have given my kid a phone and I regret it, what do I do? And does that make me look wishy-washy at the negotiation table?
Great. So I actually think the whole emergency landing thing is a perfect parallel here. Nobody would ever say, well, I'm a pilot, I did promise them I'd go to LA. You know what's interesting? In that situation, I already gave my kid a phone, or I promised them I'd land in LAX. We're focusing on the external manifestation of something instead of an internal process. A parent's job is to do the best they can with the information they have in that moment. As information changes, you might make a different decision on the surface, but your process is remarkably consistent. I'm always making the best decisions with the information I have. That's what a good pilot does. That's what a good parent does. And so I definitely don't think it changes your kind of, again, power at the table. And I don't think dynamics of power are great leadership models anyway. Like, we're on the same team as people. We're not trying to win something. But yeah, I think as a parent, you should always feel like you can make a different decision when it comes from a new realization, something that shifted. But when we do that often because we're upset that our kids are upset, that's when in some ways we're putting their emotions in the driver's seat.
Well, it reminds me of my really excellent M. Night Shyamalan plan. Obviously, to pull that off, like, I would have to radically change my own behaviors with my phone, because I'm very distracted by it. So in the slightly less extreme version, right, in the real world, do parents need to kind of model boundaries for themselves if they're kind of asking that of their kids?
Yeah, I love this question, right? Well, do I have to moderate my phone use if I'm asking my kid to do the same? I don't know if have to. Like, I don't love when people tell me I have to do anything as an adult, but I do like knowing what's effective. So I think we know as a leader, if you're asking anyone in your world to do something and you're modeling the opposite behavior, I don't think it's a matter of have to. I just think in any area of leadership, someone would say it's probably just not going to be terribly effective. It's just always more effective if you're willing to model that behavior at least some of the time yourself. I think the other thing about being on our phone that isn't just about modeling, that we have to kind of come back to this core understanding about kids, is kids are driven by the evolutionary force of attachment. That's the most important thing in their life, is figuring out how to attach to us. And they're always kind of noticing, how close am I to my parent? How much am I able to get my parents' full attention? How disconnected are we? And often I think about my own childhood and how many times I tried to get my parents' attention when a device was truly, literally between us. It was zero, because I'm old, my parents didn't have mobile phones.
It might have been on the phone.
But for my own kids, when I think about that, it's sobering, because I'm definitely not perfect at this. And I think, wow, there's probably a lot of times my kid's trying to get my attention, and there's actually this block in the attachment, the back of my phone. And so beyond modeling good digital behavior, the more disconnected I am and unavailable I am to my kid, the more bad behavior they're gonna have. Because if they can't get my attention through that attachment, they're gonna have to do it the way any of us try to get attention when we're not getting it. Escalated, difficult behavior. And that's not a win for anyone.
Before we are out of time, I wanted to make sure we touched on AI, which is a newer wrinkle that parents are dealing with, right? And I want to think about it through that same lens of connection. Because now, right, when you're giving kids your access to the internet, like, the possibility of interacting with AI is there. Like, you can try to block it, but like ChatGPT is on the web, like, the possibility is there. And to, learning problems aside, cheating on homework aside, like, thinking about it through connection, I've seen surveys that show, like, one of the main reasons kids are going to AI is for companionship, and that can be really, really dangerous. Obviously, we've seen, like, AI encouraging kids to harm themselves, but even, like, in the less extreme, if they're going to AI for connection instead of turning to their peers or to their parents, how does that complicate the sort of equation of connection and technology when you're thinking about that as a parent?
I mean, I think you're answering yourself. It really complicates that, right? I mean, I think that I think it's never been more important to stay emotionally connected to our kids, because what they are flooded with online, the videos they're gonna see, the inappropriate material they're going to come across, the text message they sent a friend that unfortunately will be screenshotted and shared in a group text, the private moments that become public, the porn they're going to see at a disturbingly young age. It's going to happen not because you have bad kids, but because they are in a digital world where they are being flooded by things that they just shouldn't see. And that is the world we're living in. And all the time when kids do things or exposed to things they know they shouldn't do or shouldn't be exposed to, they have one of two instincts. I need to go to my parent, or I need to hide this from my parent, period. And AI is just one of the things that's happening that, to me, if a kid doesn't feel like I need to go to my parent, the cost to that and their mental health is just higher than it's ever been. And so one of the things I say to my kids, which is very nuanced, but I'm a big fan of something I think is in decreasing popularity in the world, unfortunately, that you can hold two seemingly oppositional truths at the same time. My job is to make guidelines that I think keep you safe. And my job is also to be there for you when inevitably in certain moments you break those guidelines.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I want kind of parents to go into this digital world with.
Yeah. So final question before we go. Obviously, tech is going to keep evolving, right?
Yeah.
Today it's AI. In 30 years, it may be the brain chips are all the rage, right? And so if you can leave parents with like a foundational principle or something to hold on to that they can apply, whatever the evolving technology may be, what would you say is like a touchstone for how to think about this?
Yeah, I think a way of summing up what I just said is just two words. I think about this whenever I'm even frustrated with my kids. Connection first. There's no strategy we have as our kids get older except for connecting with them, because our kids get too old. They don't care about timeouts. They literally can't be punished in the same way. They definitely don't care about stickers. Not my kids. And the only thing you have when your kids get older, as they get more and more exposure in this digital world, is your relationship. And connection doesn't mean permissiveness. Connection doesn't mean keeping your kid happy. Connection means listening, being present, knowing you can repair when you mess up, because repair is probably the biggest connection builder there is, and none of us are perfect. And so those are two words I try to think about, just connection first. I think it's never mattered more.
All right, well, that is our time. Thank you so much, Dr. Becky. This has been fascinating. It's been a pleasure.
For a conversation produced by our underwriter, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, about unlocking the power of adolescence to build a better future, please welcome Lisa M. Lawson, President and CEO of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, with Richard V. Reeves, President of the American Institute for Boys and Men.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Good. Congrats on your first book.
Thank you so
Huge
much.
achievement. I'm the father of 3 boys in their 20s. They're 29, 25, and 23. I think you have a...
I have a 22-year-old daughter.
So, first of all, why this book now? And second of all, when does it end? Like, what's the end of adolescence? I'm asking for a friend, of course, but
of course.
it looked disturbingly long to me.
It is a decade long.
So why this book and how long?
So in simple terms, I wrote this book because I want to help us see and serve young people better. Adolescence, as you mentioned, is a long, somewhat messy period. All of us have been teenagers and experienced the milestones like graduations and learning to drive, but also the mistakes like maybe underage drinking or failing out of college the first time you try. But adolescence lasts from roughly the age of 14 to 24. It's a bridge between childhood and adulthood. And that's reflected in the visual on the front of the book. You see a young woman go from carrying a backpack to a briefcase. That's how long it lasts. And during that time, young people are learning all kinds of things like how to be critical thinkers, how to manage their emotions, how to deepen relationships. And I know those are all the things we as parents wish our teenagers knew right now. That's the aha I bet some parents are having, but they aren't quite developed yet to have all those skills fully. And so adolescence is this journey that enables young people to fully build those skills, and it's not done until their mid-20s. So this book is really designed to help us all understand how the science of adolescence, the more we know about what's happening, can help us build programs and supports that can help more young people get across this bridge safely.
So I'm nearly there, is what I'm hearing you saying.
You're
it's like,
almost there, Richard.
So, yeah, my kids are like here on the bridge doing that. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion of early years, and I think Governor Wes-Moore in the forward here says that like, the science of the early years really dominated policy debate. I can, as someone that's worked in this space, you and I share an interest in young people, in mobility. That's why we've worked together before. But really the science of adolescence is really grown, it seems to me. And my technical summary of the science of adolescence up until this point has been it's a hot mess, right? But
in technical terms.
Right, so, but you have a more scientific take on it, I think. So talk about the science.
I do, and that's really what the first part of the book is about. Unfortunately, we don't ever explain to young people beyond puberty what's happening in their lives, and we certainly don't tell parents what's happening during this time. So it's a profound period of cognitive, social, and emotional development. And we know certain things about how young people develop. They like to learn by doing. They don't just want to be in classrooms. They want to engage and to practice what they are learning. It can't just be abstract. It has to be practical. They like to have leadership opportunities. They want to practice decision-making abilities, which is really important. And they need relationships to help them figure out what to do when they make mistakes, because that's the context for them to figure out how to get back on track. So the more we understand about the science of adolescence, the better we can set young people up for success and prevent problems down the road.
Yeah, I love this emphasis in the book and in your work. And I should say that you've been running a program at Casey, Thrive by 25, for many years now, is the relational scaffolding, which is even more important in these years than at another point. So I think that relational element, which I think we also heard in the last session too, is hugely important. But for teens, adolescents, young adults especially, now feels like an especially important moment to have this conversation around Gen Z, etc. So what are the particular challenges that you see facing this group at such an important developmental age right now? I mean, this is not new, right?
This
is
not
as
new
long as human
science.
History, that like our brains haven't changed all that much.
No, but the world has.
So talk more about that.
The world has changed dramatically, and so young people today aren't crossing the same bridge that you and I crossed, or even that young people 10 years ago crossed. More than half of young people are growing up in families that are struggling to meet their basic needs. Young people have survived a pandemic that upended their education and their opportunity to build relationships with their peers. AI, which I know we're all talking about, is changing not just the way they learn, but what work will look like in the future. And all of these simultaneous shifts are scary for young people and are leading to mental health challenges at an unprecedented level. So we've got to make sure that the bridge we construct for young people to cross today is built for today's challenges and not yesterday's challenges. And Richard, you lead the American Institute of Boys and Men. I've talked about challenges that all young people are facing, but your work focuses particularly on challenges of young men and boys. How are their challenges maybe a little different than what I've talked about generally?
Yeah, I think they are a bit different, and thank you for asking that. In some ways, I think that particularly when it comes to technology, that's a very specific lane to go down, is that I'd be interested to know if you agree with this. I think we've got young women, in some ways it is the very relational aspect of technology that can make it potentially quite damaging, as well as good news, because there is this comparison thing. There's issues around body image. There's also issues around relational bullying and so on. It just sort of feels to me that the very fact of it being relational really seems to be a bit more affecting girls and young women. But my work on boys and young men suggests almost the opposite effect, is it can almost be more isolating. That it can actually reduce those in real life kind of relationships. And so I worry a little bit that when we talk about the impact of technology in particular on, say, young people, that we don't actually look at the ways in which it might be playing out quite differently. Not to say one is worse or better than the other, but do you agree with that? Does that fit with your read of it?
I absolutely agree. And in both cases, it's about the real world relationships they have that can help them navigate either of those challenges. How do we help young women deal with the complexities of relationships? As the mom of a daughter, I've certainly navigated a lot of that.
As the father of 3 sons, so have I. But
and this issue you point out about loneliness, it's the real life relationships that young people have with parents, with coaches, with mentors that can help them overcome some of those barriers.
I completely agree. One of the things I like about your work is that we've talked about some of the problems a little bit, and you talk about those, but there's a joyfulness to your work. All right, that actually you celebrate this period as well, that it's a period of enormous window of opportunity. And I know you've got some recommendations and solutions that are here too. I love some of them. Just give us the kind of short version of like, what should we do to kind of help to make this period a really kind of joyful and liberating and fun one, because we can sometimes overemphasize the negative. You don't do that, but say a bit more about that.
Young people don't need our pessimism. They need our support to view their lives as full of possibility and purpose. So I'll say that first. That's the goal.
Not hot mess.
Not hot mess.
Yeah.
We shouldn't say that. They can hear us when we say that. And we shouldn't judge, because we've all been a hot mess too.
Totally.
But the book really says there are 5 things young people need. And we learned this from talking to them. They need their basic needs met so they can focus on thriving, not just surviving. They need opportunities to have strong relationships with adults, not just their parents, but coaches and mentors and neighbors who can give them good guidance. They need opportunities to get education and credentials that are going to help them be prepared to be independent. They need to earn money and learn how to manage their money. And finally, they need opportunities to be leaders, because they're going to need to have agency over their lives and to be contributors to the country at large. And I think of those 5 pillars as the cables that hold up that bridge that I talked about that young people are traversing. And it's important for us as adults to see ourselves as bridge builders, to understand young people can't get those experiences, have those resources by themselves. They need us to construct a really strong, stable bridge for them. And I can tell you one example of how that science comes together is through something like apprenticeships, where young people earn money, they get job experiences, they connect to new adults in their lives, and that's where science meets innovation.
Yeah, I would say especially for young men, but that's a different conversation. But I like that cable analogy, because of course some people have a stronger cable just because of their family background. But we have a collective responsibility to make sure that everybody has that kind of support through it all. And I love what you just said about the contribution as well. I think one of the most powerful sentences that anyone can hear is, "We need you."
Yes.
And so you've turned this a little bit around to just not helping these teens kind of face the challenges, but actually we need them.
We do.
And actually their energy is amazing.
It's wonderful.
Actually, isn't it? And you think the stakes are quite high. Why are the stakes high?
There are 48 million adolescents on that bridge right now, and we need to make sure all of them get across safely and successfully, because when young people thrive, we all thrive. And I think we can be great bridge builders to make that happen.
Well, you're a bridge builder of the highest order, so thank you for that. And I take away hot mess, and instead I'm going to replace Teens Rock.
Teens Rock, exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Lawson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
And congrats again.
Here to discuss higher education in the AI era, please welcome Sian Beilock, President of Dartmouth, with Adrienne LaFrance, Executive Editor of The Atlantic.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here, and especially thank you for being with us today. You have a very hard job. And I think of the university really as sort of a microcosm for all the things that in society we're dealing with, which I think you think about a lot. And I want to get to AI and free speech and politics and all the rest, but I thought we could start with, it's been a while since I've been on a college campus with any degree of regularity, and I'd love to hear from you just sort of how college students are doing.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here, and thank you for wearing Dartmouth green. Really awesome. It's actually really wonderful on the Dartmouth campus right now. Our students just started classes on Monday, and something that I think is really special about Dartmouth is that all of our students go out and go hiking or camping in the woods our first years before they start. They go out with upper class students, which as president, it gives me a little bit of a heartache to send them all out into the woods, but they're without phones, they're without social media, they're out without the pressure of daily life, and I think that's great for young brains.
You wrote a really smart essay for us, which was published in The Atlantic this morning, so everyone should read it. And one of the things you write about, you reference a colleague's work and how she's found students over the years sort of retreating from one another in some ways, connected to technology, certainly, but talk a little bit about the observations that she's had and that you've had in that regard.
Yeah, I really think it's important at this point in time to ask the question over and over what the purpose of higher education is. I firmly believe we are there to teach students how to think, not what to think, that we're educational institutions, we are not political organizations, we're not activist organizations. Those can be important, but it's not what we do. And one of the ways we teach students how to think is not just about the transfer of information. Information is everywhere these days, and certainly in the age of AI. But it's about building those skills of dialogue, of communication, of looking at someone face to face, of empathy, of humility, of understanding that even if I vehemently disagree with you, we can see the common humanity in each other. And my colleague, Christy Clemens, who leads our university-wide initiative, Dartmouth Dialogues, has talked about over the years how students used to interact face-to-face when they were in conflict, maybe with roommates. And then during COVID and after, and as social media came really rearing onto the scene, they started texting each other and then leaving voice memos and not even engaging. And so we have made it a real point at Dartmouth to really put first and foremost that one of the things we're going to develop are dialogue skills, listening skills. We believe it's a muscle that has to be developed like anything else.
I want to go back to this, but because you mentioned the sort of post-COVID era, what are you noticing in students who are now coming to college having had some of their formative high school experiences during the pandemic years? We at The Atlantic have covered often what people sometimes refer to as a literacy crisis, and this concern that a lot of students are entering college really not having had the proper literature or reading skills that one might expect. Obviously, Dartmouth is an excellent school. What are you seeing there in this regard?
Yeah, I would say our students are coming with different experiences in education. There's more heterogeneity than we might have thought. And we do believe that it's we have to help make sure to level the playing field for students. So students who had different resources or accesses, especially during COVID. And then, of course, it's not just on the academic side, as I mentioned, on the social side as well. And for a student to learn how to study, to interrogate information, to ask questions about sources, to learn how to disagree productively, again, those are muscles that we feel as a university we're responsible for pushing.
And talking about dialogue across differences, as you put it, obviously one thing that comes to mind is the horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk. He was actually set to speak at Dartmouth, I believe, this week. Talk about how the events of the past week have been processed for you as a university leader and just in conversation with students on campus?
Yeah, so Charlie Kirk was set to debate Hassan Piker, and I was really proud that our Dartmouth Political Union, this is a student-run organization. We're one of the only bipartisan student-run political unions in the country, headed by our Dartmouth conservatives and Dartmouth Democrats, and they invited this debate to campus, and the students were moderating it, and the students were creating a culture where it is better to question and push, and where dialogue that you might not like is met with more dialogue. And so obviously it was just tragic and really heartbreaking for our students. One thing I'm really proud of is that in lieu of this event, at least for now, and we will do additional events in the future, students are bringing faculty together to have conversations about political violence. And again, this is something that I think we lose in this day and age, this intergenerational face-to-face conversation. There's not as many places to do it. We don't have as many community centers or people going to religious organizations where you have these generations talking together. And I again think that this can be one really vital component of college campuses.
And you've had to think about this too in the context of protest after October 7th, and I'm curious to hear you talk about that experience. You know, I think it was last spring, you made the decision to have police help clear the Dartmouth Green, and talk about that and also sort of how the community responded. I mean, we haven't seen, obviously there's lots of robust free speech activity taking place at Dartmouth, but we haven't seen it become sort of out of control or a big flashpoint in the way of some other universities. And I'm curious why you think that is.
Yeah, we take free speech very seriously. My belief is that our job as an institution is to create an environment where people with different views feel like they can come to the table and push at each other, because that's how you get the best outcomes. Because of that, we take a position of institutional neutrality or restraint, where I don't speak out on the political issue of the day. I will always defend our mission and our mission as an educational institution. But the whole idea is, if I speak, then someone might feel like they don't have as much of an ability to speak in a different way than myself. And so I'm an institutionalist in that I believe the point of higher education is to create the conditions where people can view different ideas, where people can engage in conversation and debate. Now, that doesn't mean anything goes. It means that we are imbuing in our faculty and our students the privilege of inviting speakers to campus and having those dialogues. I always say I don't invite speakers and I don't deplatform speakers. That is the role of our campus and community. Now, to invite speakers, not deplatform them. Now, to be clear, free speech has boundary conditions. And the way I think the best way to think about this is that my free expression can't rob someone else of their free expression. That means no shouting down speakers, and we're not okay with students or anyone taking over part of campus and declaring it for only one ideology. That is robbing others of their free expression. And when we have needed to, especially for safety reasons, we will enforce that in the ways we do. Now, of course, not everyone agrees with that. Some people think some speakers should be shouted down, or we should only hear one type of voice on campus. But again, I think that goes against our educational mission. And if we are siding and taking up one ideology as president or as the institution as a whole, people are not going to trust the knowledge we produce and the people we produce. And we know right now that there is a record lack of trust in higher education from both the left and the right. And I believe it's our responsibility as leaders, and especially leaders of the most elite institutions out there, to work to get that trust back.
It's also, you know, you risk getting into an endless cycle of, if you're expected to comment on one thing and then you have to comment on everything. I mean, I think when we've talked about this before, that this sort of having the discipline to not weigh in, which is actually sort of a, unfortunately, radical position to take in a world where everyone's feeling the need to tweet and do whatever else.
It's hard, actually, and you know, sometimes I have to suppress my personal opinions and ideas to think as the leader of an institution, but I want to set the stage for my faculty to be out there, for my students to be out there, to have that robust discussion on campus. And I weigh in related to our mission in ways that are important. So we've joined lawsuits defending our federal funding. We've joined amicus briefs in support of Harvard pushing against federal funding. But I want to do that in a way that is consistent with our mission and that puts what we do front and center, that again, we are an educational institution and our goal is to train the best and brightest to go out and lead our democracy.
So this is interesting because you're going exactly in the direction where I wanted to go next, which is obviously there's, on one side inculcating free speech values and independent thinking in students, but then you're also in this political environment where there is a real threat of government overreach into higher education. And you mentioned joining lawsuits with other universities, but you've also been, I think, disciplined or careful about when you want to weigh in on Dartmouth's behalf. I think, and you'll correct me if I'm getting the details wrong, but there was an open letter or something that you chose not to sign. Talk about how you make the decision when to pull together with other universities or when to hold back.
Yeah, well, I think two things can be true at the same time, and I think in general we're not good at holding different and conflicting truths. One is we have to do better as institutions of higher education to make sure that we're living up to our responsibility for the country and the world, and that means really being clear that we are education institutions and we're giving students a broad range of ideas to push at. The second is that we have to fiercely defend against government overreach and be very clear that we are fiercely independent academic institutions. We have to be the ones deciding what we teach, how we teach, and the research we do. Our faculty do that. And so I weigh in ways that I believe are productive, whether that's joining lawsuits, whether it's having conversations. I don't feel that just speaking for the sake of speaking gets us where we need to go. So I weigh in when I believe there will be action, that action can be taken. And I have never signed a letter that I didn't write. And I believe that the way to affect change is both to take responsibility for how we have to push forward, to have conversations in DC and be out there, and I work very closely with my peers, and then to speak for ourselves, which I do in communication in many ways, such as this, and also to take legal action when we believe that our rights or our mission are being put under the microscope in the wrong way.
I appreciate your stance on open letters. I feel the same way, and I actually just have to plug a piece by my colleague Graham Wood, several years ago now, wrote a piece in the Atlantic called "The Case Against Open Letters," and it articulates, I think, I won't speak for you, but you should read it too and see if you agree, but it's one of my favorite pieces.
I have to say I read it a few times after I was getting a lot of, pushback for what I did. It made me feel a little better. That and my mom texting me that I had to take care of myself.
Well, that's always good too. I was speaking, just one more on this topic and then we'll go to AI, but I was speaking with an Atlantic subscriber yesterday who was sort of pushing me on why media organizations haven't banded together to try to, push back against, the extent to which Donald Trump attacks the media, and he posed a similar question in terms of universities, and maybe you've already answered this, but I'm curious to hear, just because you do talk to all of these other university leaders, have people floated an idea of we should create a consortium, or how do those, tell me if that's even practical, I'm curious what you think.
Well, we do have consortia. So Dartmouth is part of the American Association of Universities, right, and we are the participants in many of the lawsuits that have been put against the government in terms of federal funding. I'm on the board of the American Council of Education, which also supports institutions. And so we do have consortium. We are together, and I'm often in DC with my fellow presidents. But I think the question is, as a leader, and as a leader of a higher education institution, is how do you act in a way that allows you to uphold the values and get outcomes that you want. And I think taking legal action, talking, being in conversation together, and our consortia have certainly done that, is the best way to affect change.
It also arguably gives you room to actually lead the way, right? I think about Dartmouth bringing back SATs, which was very controversial. If you're in a group, it's harder to bring everyone along, but if you do it because you think it's right for your university, talk about that, because others have followed your lead on that.
Well, we don't talk about admissions with our fellow institutions, because that would be antitrust.
Noted.
Just to put that out there. But we looked at the data at Dartmouth, and I think, again, this is a place of getting trust back in institutions. And the lore was that having the SAT as part of a holistic admissions process would disadvantage lower income students, especially those who didn't have the ability to hire tutors or practice. And we certainly know that having the ability to take the SAT multiple times and and higher resources allows you to do better. But the data are very clear that actually other parts of the application are more related to wealth. So for example, do you have someone who's helping you decide what you're doing over the summer? Do you have the option to go work in the Galapagos versus at McDonald's? Who's helping you write your personal statement or figuring out who should write your letters of recs? And the data actually showed when we looked at it and when we looked at our own data over multiple years that one, the SAT was an important predictor of performance, but two, lower income students were leaving out their scores because they thought it would negatively reflect on their application. And if they had put it in, we actually would have been able to see how they were excelling in their environment and invite them to campus. And as we think about what we're doing, which is trying to create a campus of the best and the brightest excelling wherever they are across the world, we're looking for students from diverse backgrounds, diverse ideologies, different parts of the country, and we want tools to find them. And I generally believe that more data is better than less. And so we brought back the SAT and we made a statement about it, and almost all of our Ivy and Ivy Plus peers followed, and I feel really good about that decision.
All right, let's go to AI. What's going to happen? I'm curious here. I mean, your philosophy has been really to let faculty lead the way in their own classrooms. Dartmouth has also been a university that has been really technologically forward historically. So tell me a little bit about how you think about it and how that factors into guarding against the uses of AI that might not be as productive for learning.
Well, if you leave remembering nothing today, remember Dartmouth green, and you know, I have the nails and you've got the dress there.
Yes.
And also Dartmouth actually was the birthplace of the phrase AI, coined in 1956 after a summer conference, and we've really led the way in technology. So BASIC was developed on our campus, and we were the first campus to give every student a personal computer to have on campus. And so we're always thinking about our responsibility there. And it is true, we've been letting students and faculty experiment in different ways. Our faculty doing research in the sciences and engineering and much of the humanities use large language models often in what they do. But the way we're really thinking about this is allowing students to use it to enhance the human experience as a tool, right? We want students to learn how to interact with this technology and use it to even, in some sense, make their thinking better, but not lose sight of what makes one human. So our first-year students are writing with AI. In our medical school, they're learning to diagnose illness and interact with patients with virtual AI. Our business school, they negotiate with virtual AI. And we're also working with AI as a way for students to map how they find alums in different career paths. And so we're thinking about it in this way of enhancing what's human. And I do think that never is it more important to think about the liberal arts and a broad education across the arts and sciences and thinking about how to think, and that's what we offer. But we can do that where AI may be a great collaborator and may allow our thinking to change in particular ways. And if you again think about what the purpose of a college campus is, to push your thinking, to open up that aperture, I think AI can be another way.
We hear from some professors who are calling for, you know, like totally computers out of the classroom entirely, not like out of people's lives, but like going back to blue books and having people write long-form essays. Do you have professors there that are thinking this way?
That's the beauty of a college campus. Our professors get to decide how they teach in the classroom, and some professors have decided to go back to blue books, and I think that's fine. But the reality is that this is something that all of our students and all of us are going to be interacting with. And I want to think about how we can be first and foremost in underscoring what's human, what's so important, these face-to-face interactions, having everyone in the room, and how we can learn to expand our thinking in interesting ways.
One of the things I've long wondered is, I mean, I think I understand why the very well-resourced tech companies have been able to lead the way in terms of AI development at this stage in technological history, but it does feel to me like it would be nice if universities were at the table with them, or if they, you know, if this weren't just driven by companies that stand to profit from what they build and have scale as an incentive. And I'm curious how you think about that. I mean, are we too far into the way that things are now in terms of who holds technological power and resources that, you know, I think back to like the 60s or 70s when DARPA is created in a university. Like, what is the university's role in in driving forward new technological innovation?
Yeah, first of all, I think a lot of faculty from institutions are working very closely with tech companies, and I think there's more of a role for formal partnerships and thinking together. We, of course, hold faculty who have knowledge, cognitive science knowledge about how people learn.
You're a cognitive scientist yourself.
How people hold mental models, how people think deeply about issues, and how we can bring that to artificial intelligence. And we have a lot of faculty at Dartmouth who are studying brain, studying mental health, and thinking with tech companies about how we might do this better. And I will say that one of our researchers just developed the first clinically tested AI-driven therapist, especially important in rural regions where people might not have access to care, and it's been shown to be really effective. And we're excited to bring that clinical expertise developed through our hospital and through Dartmouth Health and our med school to some of the programs that are out there.
I want to zoom out in our last several minutes here. In terms of, you know, we've talked about various heavy subject matter here, unknown futures with AI, you know, political violence, free speech, government interference. When, you know, as you're thinking about all of the many things you have to handle as the leader of this institution, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? What are you most worried about?
Look, I think that especially elite institutions lost a beat on where our mission is. And going back to this idea that we're education institutions, and this is so important to be squarely focused on this to get the kind of trust back in what we do. And so I'm always thinking about how I can help my campus and higher education do that best. It means having different viewpoints on campus. Not every viewpoint. I don't think we have to have a flat earther on campus, but if our faculty member invites them, I would be supportive of that. Of them inviting them, but it is about being in a place where people can push the boundaries of what they're thinking. And I want to make sure that we're creating that environment. And then it's giving our students, faculty, staff, alumni, parents, the tools to really learn how to listen, to see the common humanity in others. And we know we're losing that. We have faculty, one of our great government professors, Sean Westwood, who shows 1 in 5 people get their news through large language models, which we know have biases and push people in different directions. And he's looking at the polarization of our country and this sort of tendency to always other people who disagree with you. And I think that, as we know, is such a dangerous place to be. And I think universities can be a place that help bring the next leaders of our free society to a place where they're talking and listening rather than shouting.
Right, and so how do we take these, I mean, first of all, hearing you describe it makes me want to go to Dartmouth. So maybe I'll get another degree. But beyond that, like, how do we, I mean, what you're describing seems achievable within a university, and you've had great success, demonstrable success, you know, living these values at Dartmouth. How do we take that and you know, apply it to the rest of society? Like, how do you get from here to there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the first things and quickest things to do is just find people to talk to that you know might feel differently than you. We are so good at siloing ourselves off, talking only within our own political persuasion, not having those conversations. And you may not agree on everything. You may never change your mind, but I promise you it will make your arguments better to talk to someone else who's different than you and to just see the common humanity in them. Last year through Dartmouth Dialogues, we had 2 programs I really liked. One, we have a partnership with StoryCorps and One Small Step, where we bring students of different political persuasions together just to get to know each other. And these conversations have been recorded, I think, close to 1 million times, and we're doing it with students who lean more left and right, and they talk about finding these common values. We also did a program for students before they went home for Thanksgiving to learn how to have conversations with people at the dinner table. I think we should do that for the country. But again, it's this idea that we know that people on the right and the left think that people who are opposite ideas from them are very polarizing. But it turns out we're all just as polarizing on either side of an issue, and people actually want to come together for the most part.
And very few people even are cleanly in one camp or the other.
Totally agree.
Well, thank you so much. This is so wonderful to have you. Really appreciate your work, and thank you all.
Thank you.
For a conversation on navigating the intelligence economy, please welcome Scott Galloway, professor at NYU's Stern School of Business, with Derek Thompson, contributing writer at The Atlantic.
I want more! I can't see anything. Is there 8 people or 8,000?
Somewhere in the middle, I think. We have 25 minutes to distill your entire mind on the state of AI. So let's talk about the present. What do you see as the state of play with the intelligence economy?
The intelligence economy, that's some Atlantic bullshit. The intelligence economy. Okay, let's start off with, by the way, it's great to be here. I'm a huge fan of this young man. I've loved his work and have known him for 10 years since he was 14.
That's right.
So state of the play in the market, basically AI, or it's no longer the S&P 500, it's the S&P 10. And that is, markets are touching new highs every day, but 70% of the earnings growth is from just 10 companies. So effectively, if someone were to say, okay, just to give you a sense of some of these numbers, these companies are spending about $250 billion a year in CapEx on about $25 billion a year so far in revenue. Typically, it's a company that's spending a lot on CapEx spends 0.1% of their top line on CapEx. These guys are spending 10 times. To give you a sense of the scale, OpenAI just committed to a $300 billion contract for compute with Oracle, $60 billion a year, and they're currently doing $10 billion. So the expectations here are just so incredible for what AI is supposed to do to our economy. Now, a study comes out from MIT saying 95% of companies that have deployed AI are getting 0 ROI so far. And then the stocks came back about 10%. If you look at the valuations here, one of 2 things has to happen. We either need to find an incremental $1 trillion in revenues from these companies, or get $1 trillion in efficiencies, which is Latin for firing people, or these companies' stocks get cut in half. So I don't see any incremental revenue coming out of AI. I don't see L'Oreal coming out with new moisturizers or Mazda coming out with a new AI car. What you do see is companies talking about efficiencies. And if you think half the economy is somewhat immune from AI, chiropractors, nurses, what have you, plumbers, only 150 million Americans work. So 75 million Americans are quote unquote vulnerable to AI. To get that $1 trillion, you're talking about a job destruction of about either 10 million people, or this doesn't end up being the great efficiency engine monster we thought it was going to be, and you're going to see a collapse in these stocks. And where I would wrap is that if someone said, try and predict why in 12 months, we have a crystal ball and we know the markets have just been massively corrected, triggering a global recession. Try and guess the cause. Well, is it attack drones going into NATO countries? Could be. Some sort of civil war in America? I don't think so. The thread I think that gets pulled that could potentially take down the global economy right now in terms of a short-term or a global recession would be the following. These 10 companies now account for 40% of the S&P's value. The S&P represents 50% of total global market cap. So 20% of the global market cap of stocks is represented by 10 companies. And if big companies come out and say the following, we've made a huge investment in AI, because every time I use the term AI in an earnings call, my stock goes up. And we're finding we're not getting the return we'd hoped for, so we're scaling back our purchases of licenses and GPU hoppers. You could see literally a collapse in these 10 companies, which is a collapse in the entire S&P, which is a significant drawdown in the global economy. So it's great to be these companies right now, but we have become, this is the tail that's going to wag the global economy for the next 12 months, is AI living up to the promise of which we really haven't seen since 1999 in terms of expectations around technology.
Yeah, people sometimes ask me, do I think AI is going to be the most important technology of the 2030s, or do I think it's a bubble? And my answer is yes.
Yes, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you look at the last 2 times that the US spent this share of GDP on infrastructure for a single technology. It was the broadband build-out in the late 1990s, early 2000s.
Cisco.
And before that, it's the railroads.
Yeah.
The infrastructure build-out was a bubble.
Yep.
The railroads weren't one bubble. There was basically three. There was a panic of 1857, a panic of 1873, a panic of 1891. Every time we have this kind of infrastructure dedicated to a single technology, yes, it can change the world, but on the path toward changing the world, it's incredibly bubblicious. So how do you see us going from the bubble dynamics that you're describing right now to a world where AI does, in fact, begin to be a world with real winners?
Well, let's just focus on the word winners. And that is, if you think about so let's just assume that this is a tectonic shift in productivity and a technology that does, in fact, have massive, let's call it stakeholder value. The general assumption that is dangerous is that this will be similar to e-commerce, search, and social, and that is a small number of companies will be able to capture or sequester trillions of dollars in shareholder value because of the incredible breakthrough of this technology. If you look at what's happening among LLMs, they're reaching parity. I love the fact that AI, the first person AI is going to put out of work is AI. Because AI goes and crawls every other LLM, and it's very hard to maintain any sort of differentiation. Let me give you a few examples and a thesis. I think the real winners of AI, if you're going to talk about productivity, and we'll come back to the downsides, are all of us. The airline industry, skirting along the surface of the atmosphere at 7/10 the speed of sound. I've been in Nashville, London, and here, and I'm about to be in Aspen, Montecito in the next 72 hours. That technology, jet transportation technology, is such an incredible unlock. If you added up all of the profits and losses from the jet manufacturers and the airlines, this year it's almost a break even. Remember Pan Am, TWA, none of these companies have been able to make any money. PCs, put a $50 million mainframe on your desk, unbelievable unlock in productivity. I'm about to make the weakest flex in the world. I was on the board of Gateway Computer. We sold the second most computers in the world in 2006, 3 times as many as Apple. We sold for $700 million. The Magnificent 10, any one of them will lose or gain that much in 2 minutes in a trading day. No one was able to sequester value around PCs, around airlines. Vaccines, greatest innovation, I would argue, in history, despite what some of our leadership wants you to believe. What company has been able to sequester value or capture value? Moderna's down 90%. So a thesis I would posit is the following. The winners of AI may be us, but if DeepSeek can come out and grab 4% market share overnight with something that costs a lot less, you might find that this is more like the airline, the PC, and the vaccine industry, where no 1 or 2 companies is able to create $1, $2, $4 trillion in value, and that we're the big winners.
Who loses?
The shareholders of these companies. That if all of a sudden, I mean, the expectations are that these companies, I mean, $10 billion on a $500 billion market cap is just so extraordinary. Most overvalued companies in the world, in my opinion, are Tesla, which has become a meme stock. No automobile company's revenues are declining faster than Tesla, yet it's worth more than the entire auto industry. That just doesn't make any sense. Palantir, trading at 60 times revenues, right? Anything with kind of that AI salsa on top of the chip of an ordinary company gets massive explosion in value. I think that AI is going to be, I'm an AI optimist. I think we're going to get a lot of benefits from it. I'm sure I'm using it much more. I find it's an incredible tool. But I'm not convinced that this is going to be something that's going to drive the markets the way our expectation is it's going to drive. Because if you really look at the other 490 companies, especially with the bullshit of tariffs, especially with an AI legislation that basically takes the Atlantic and says, okay, every AI company, molest them and don't pay them. You know, there's a transfer of value right now from the 490 other old economy firms to the 10 that are not subject to tariffs, that are given full license to basically steal IP. And the result is their valuations are driving the entire market. So I think shareholders are the ones who are at biggest risk.
I want to talk about AI as an economic technology and as a social technology, imagining that this stuff does pan out, that we're not looking at something that's purely illusory. The technology really has benefits to people like me and you and the coders who are programming themselves out of work, and even to the doctors who are now working with the technology and might eventually be displaced by it. Just at a very personal level, you mentioned that you work with it, you like it. What do you do with it?
Well, what I tell people who are scared about AI is I say AI is not going to take your job. Someone who understands AI is going to take your job. So I have my strategy is I'm trying to be a ninja warrior and figure out how to use this weapon. So I do what's called a second screen strategy. And on my desk, I have a second screen. It has Claude and it has ChatGPT. And everything I do, I turn to AI and I try to figure out how I could use it. I upload my medical records and say, what do I need to do? And they all say the same goddamn thing, drink less. Anyways. But I do a newsletter, No Mercy, No Malice. It came out today. It's 2,200 words. It's too long. I'm like, I'd like to hear myself talk and I like to hear myself write. My posts are always too long, so I'll say, cut 400 words and highlight what you're cutting and why. Or I'll say, this paragraph is lacking data, any interesting data. And then I go to the second LLM to fact check the first. How do you use it?
In a remarkably similar way. I was just talking to Ariana Huffington the other day, and she was asking me if I knew my LDL levels. And I said I didn't, but I just had a blood test 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the doctor puts up the information, and it's delivered. They give me the number, and then they show me the degree to which the number is in a normal range, and they have a bar graph that shows where the abnormal range is. I didn't know what any of it meant. You know, APOE, LDL. Like I know what some of these acronyms mean, but not all of them. I took 17 screenshots of my blood test data. I sent it to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I said, I'm a 39-year-old white man with a 2-year-old daughter. I don't sleep as well as I should. Understanding all of that, I want you to both give me a plain English readout of my blood test results, and I want you to tell me where I am relative to the typical 39-year-old white man. In 15 seconds, I get the whole readout.
39, fuck you.
I get a call from my... It didn't say that. See, AI can be very, very nice. I got a call from my doctor.
God.
I get a call from my doctor, right? Sorry. I'll give you time.
What went wrong?
Get a call from the doctor 2 days later. She tells me the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I know. Dr. GPT told me. So that's one way that I use it. The other way that I use it is I just left the Atlantic and go to Substack, and what I don't have at Substack is a copy editor.
Yeah.
The Atlantic has an amazing copy edit team. I finish a Substack essay, I give it to ChatGPT, I say, edit, find grammar and typo errors, edit them inline in bold. And so I have 2 screens now on my computer. I have my essay for Substack, and I have my edited essay with all of the errors in bold on ChatGPT, and I just scroll.
Super powerful.
The edit's done in 35 seconds. You know, both these things are somewhat antisocial. I don't need my doctor. I have GPT. I don't need a copy editor. I have ChatGPT. And I want to move our conversation a little bit to the social realm, because you've talked a lot about the phenomenon of youth loneliness and male loneliness.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that having a technology that is skilled at simulating human conversation will be a salve for the loneliness crisis that ails us.
Yeah. So first off, there are some upsides. Seniors who've lost all their friends or don't have family support, the idea of having a companion to help you, people are using it for therapy, there's definitely some upsides. I think we're having a lot of false debates around the risks of AI. Well, it's going to decide that we're evil and kill us. There's always an off switch in technology. I'm not a philosopher, but there's usually someone behind the technology. Self-healing weapons. I don't see any reason why AI couldn't be used defensively as well as offensively to seek out threats before they happen. Income inequality, 100%. Everyone in this room has voted for income inequality. Just look at your taxes. We all engage in an income inequality society. We've made conscious decisions to transfer money from young people to old people. People under the age of 40, 24% less wealthy than they were 40 years ago. People over the age of 70, 72% wealthier. It didn't happen by accident. Old people have figured out a way to vote themselves more money every year and pretend to give a fuck. There is the biggest threat of loneliness, hands down, of AI is loneliness. And 1 out of 4 men does not have a best friend. 1 out of 7 men does not have a single friend. 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 has not had sex in the last year. You now have AI girlfriends. You now have a destruction of about 50% of time with friends among young people. And let me just go to Charlie Kirk. We have this false argument over, was it the radical left or the radical right? Look at all the data. It skews radical right. But for the most part, the people committing these horrible crimes are less politically engaged than you or me. Mm-hmm. What they have in common is the following. 98% of mass shooters are men. The majority of them are young, and they're all extremely online. And the real problem is the following. You have 40% of the market cap of the S&P is essentially in the business of rage. And that is, I've been teaching brand strategy for 22 years. From 1945 to 1995, we thought that the ultimate solve for marketing was sex. Sex sells. Drink this beer, you'll be hotter. Wear this watch, more likely to have a random sexual encounter, right? That was the basic theory for, I'm being very serious, for the additional margin, right? I'm wearing a $120 t-shirt that I think makes me look 59 again. Anyways, and then we found out with the introduction of Google, or specifically the algorithms figured out that there's something that sells even better than sex, and that's rage. And if you look at what's happened, it's young men with a lack of opportunity who go extremely online, get enraged. You know, do what Darth Vader suggested. Search your feelings, you know this to be true. Think about what happens to you online. Last 5 days, I've gone into a rabbit hole. I've sequestered from my kids, sequestered from my family, sequestered from my friends, and I'm getting increasingly anxious, angry, and upset. And imagine you're doing this 16 hours a day as a young man with a lack of economic or romantic opportunities, whose prefrontal cortex is not as developed, who is much more risk aggressive. Oh, and by the way, has access to guns. This is a rage economy fueled by companies that have figured out that enragement equals Nissan ads equals more shareholder value. So they traffic and rage. They are overwhelming. The young man with the lack of opportunities is no match for the godlike technology of these companies that are trying to convince him he can have a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen with an algorithm. You don't need friends. You got Discord and Reddit. You don't need to take risks of getting a job and putting on a tie. You can make money trading stocks or crypto on Robinhood. Why would you go through the humiliation, the effort to shower, look good, work out, demonstrate kindness, demonstrate excellence, have a plan, endure rejection, go out such that you can find a romantic partner when you have porn? The scariest stat I've seen is that in America today, 48% of 18 to 24-year-old men have not asked a woman out in person ever. Think about that. And I'll end on a note where there's this anti-alcohol movement among Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia, who I like a lot. They're on my podcast. And my advice is that young people need to drink a lot more. The risk to your 25-year-old liver is dwarfed by the risk of social isolation. And my advice to every young man, I coach a lot of young men, is to get strong, have a plan, get used to no. That's the way you get to yes. Get out, drink more, make a series of bad decisions, and might pay off.
I would agree with a lot of that. It's interesting because when I drink, I know that I become more extroverted, less neurotic, more agreeable. And there was a Financial Times analysis of changes in Big 5 personality traits among young people today. Young people who, as you indicated, just passed the 2/3 mark in the share who say that moderate drinking is bad for them, highest in the history of the poll. Young people today are less agreeable, more neurotic, significantly less extroverted. They're also less conscientious. And I don't want to draw a direct relationship here between, well, of course it's because they're drinking less, but it is the exact result of what you would expect among a generation that has historically turned against not just drinking, but also everything that comes with it. Leaving your home to be around people that aren't a screen. And it brings me back to a point. I am also worried about rage, but I'm worried about its opposite as well when people use AI. The opposite of rage is something like sycophancy. Like, these AI tools are incredible at telling people what we want to hear. I was talking to, my wife just finished her PhD program at UNC, and at the graduation, one person there was talking about how incredible these AI tools are at essentially delivering talk therapy. They understand CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can be essentially turned into an artificial intelligence. But they said these tools will always tell you that you're right. So if you have OCD and you have a good therapist, your therapist won't tell you that all of your obsessive compulsions are good. The most important word in OCD is disorder. But the AI doesn't know that. It is designed, especially by human reinforcement, to tell people what it thinks is likely to get it an 100%. A+, right?
That's right.
And I'm worried about the degree to which we essentially outfit young people with a machine of narcissism. Because if you are told by your AI best friend that all of your fears are valid, and all of your ideas are brilliant, and all of your crazy, strange theories about how the world works are, in fact, Einstein-level pieces of genius, you're going to grow up, I'm worried, in a world where you expect a level of sycophantic narcissism from everyone that surrounds you, and you'll be disappointed by carbon-based life forms because we don't offer that. So how do you feel about this idea that, yes, I agree that AI-inflected social media can be a rage machine, but it can also be, in this subtle way, a kind of narcissism machine as well?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it through the lens of narcissism. I think it's creating a group of people, mostly young men, who are very fragile and don't develop real-world life skills. Because to your point, these relationships are frictionless, and they tell you, oh, no, you're a genius, and oh, yeah, sure, and yeah, they just can continue to reinforce this notion that life is easy and you're wonderful. And like real victory comes from no. I can't imagine you just woke up and were writing at the Atlantic and making a bunch of money on Substack. The reason I get to hang out with someone much higher character and quite frankly much hotter than me is because I endured so much fucking no. And it gave me skills. And that's the thing. If you think about the best things in your life, right? They were a function of really sloppy, awful, hard interactions with people. And we're raising a generation of people who don't ever develop those skills. And then they wake up at 30 and they're living with their parents and they don't have the skills to navigate no or hard things. And they're anxious, they're obese, and they're incredibly lonely. And by the way, I don't want to pathologize young men. One of my role models was on stage earlier, Richard Reeves. And the bottom line, this young generation is very violent, but the majority of their violence is towards themselves. There's this terrible trend on TikTok with women saying, I would never go on a date because the chances that I'd be unalived by him. Okay, let's look at the data. If you agree to go on a date with a young man, the guy you're on the date with, the young man, is 16 times more likely to go home and kill himself than harm you. You know, young men killing themselves at 4 times the rate of women? Get me out of this.
Well, what you're describing, I think of as a kind of disease. Mm-hmm. And the vector of the disease is technology.
Yeah.
And it seems unlikely that we're going to find the cure in technology alone. Right? The cure is going to have to come from leaders and from people, and God forbid, maybe even from politicians at some point.
Well, that's the thing. The incumbents weaponize the illusion of complexity. There are real-world common sense solutions here. You just had the president of Dartmouth, who I think is an exceptionally impressive woman. They have an $8 billion endowment. They let in 1,100 people. That helping? They could double their enrollments, triple them. We need more third spaces for young people. I believe we need mandatory national service. We need a zeitgeist in our society where men step up. The point of failure, if you were to reverse engineer the single point of failure when a boy comes off the tracks, it's when he loses a male role model. And there are 3 times as many women applying to be big sisters in New York as there are men applying to be big brothers. We need more coaches. We need more men in K through 12. I'm just parroting Richard Reeves right now. We need a more progressive tax structure that gives younger people lower taxes and people making more money higher taxes. We need 8 million new homes, manufactured homes, that cost less than homes being built on site. We need more empathy for young men. We need to dramatically expand freshman classes at universities. If you're not growing your freshman class faster than population and you have an endowment over $1 billion, it should lose its tax-free status because you decided you're no longer a public servant. You're a Chanel bag. We need massive increase in vocational programming. 11% of LinkedIn profiles in Germany and the UK say apprentice. It's 3% in the US because we shame people who are in vocational jobs. There is mandatory national service. There is a massive number of real-world solutions that we could offer to lift up young people such that they don't feel as hopeless and they don't get 210 notifications a day saying if you don't have a ridiculously hot boyfriend and you haven't made $10 million trading, Ethereum, you're a loser. So remove Section 230 protections from these rage companies. If you engage in content that you algorithmically elevate, you are now an editor and should be subject to the same liability that the Atlantic is. If teen girls are going home and cutting themselves because of content you made a decision to elevate beyond its organic reach, then you should be subject to the same liability you would be subject to if your content was creating harm and self-cutting in young women. There are a ton of real-world things we can do to address this problem. But instead, we have big tech delay and obfuscating any of these solutions. Notice how quiet they've been about the Charlie Kirk issue. We need much more empathy for young men because of the under and privilege of my generation, not so much yours, but of my generation, where we crammed a massive amount of prosperity into the third of the US population that was white with outdoor plumbing. We are now holding young men accountable and have no empathy for them. They own fewer homes than single women. I think that's great. We should do nothing to get in the way of women's progress. But they're about to be 2-to-1 almost, female to male college graduates in the next 5 years, and it creates a mating crisis because the reality is, and we like to say this, women mate socioeconomically, and you've written about this, horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. And when the pool of potential mates horizontal and up among men keeps shrinking, there's just no men out there that young women are interested in. And without the guardrails of a relationship, men come off the tracks. You know that myth, and it's a myth, of the woman in her 30s that didn't find romantic love? What a tragedy. Living with her cats, that cartoon. The reality is, young men need relationships much more than women. Widows are happier after their husband dies. True story. I'm sorry, widows are happier after their husband dies. Widowers are less happy after their wife dies. A young man, a woman who doesn't have a romantic relationship in her 30s pours that additional relationship energy into her friends and her professional life. A young man pours it into video games, conspiracy theory, misogyny, nationalist content, and porn. Young men desperately need relationships. So the bottom line is we need a series of programs that lift up all young people, but hopefully make men, quite frankly, more viable economically and romantically. Because there is nothing more dangerous to himself and occasionally to others than a lonely, broke young man, and we are producing millions of them, and fucking big tech is pretending that they're not the root cause of it, and they are. Enough already. We know what to do. Let's do it.
I think loneliness and aloneness is one of the more important epidemics of our time, and I think humans are going to be the vaccine, and I'm grateful that you are, I don't want to say Moderna because the stock is down 90%, so say the Pfizer of human vaccines against aloneness. So thank you for all of your advocacy on this issue.
Thanks, brother.
I appreciate it.